Welcome to the Thoughtful Software Podcast. Innovate and thrive with thoughtful software. This podcast is all about helping technology leaders simplify innovation, build emerging tech, and confidently fuel digital initiatives. Join Andrew and Fahad Shokat as they discuss how to navigate the ever-changing software landscape. Keep it simple, focus on people, and consistently deliver value.
So as technology leaders, we're often thinking about the next thing for our organizations. And the big question is, how do we turn our ideas into something tangible, into reality, into a valuable asset? It's not easy. And 70% of executives believe their initiatives are doomed from the start, which is crazy, but they aren't wrong since we know that 68% of software projects fail. However, there are some ways we can communicate our ideas in a more understandable way that teams can digest and hopefully execute better. On this podcast, over the last few years, we've spoken a great deal about various technologies, best practices, things that are happening in our industry. So today we're going to discuss how to turn your vision into reality. So Andrew, let's start from the beginning. When an idea is born, and the early thoughts are forming, what would you recommend to tech leaders and how to initially capture those ideas?
So, I think with a lot of people start with the solution. They start in the solution space of, I'm going to do this. And I think tech leaders need to start in the problem space, and they need to think about what problem they're trying to solve. Right. It's very fun to write features and think about how your customer is going to interact with your solution. I think it's a whole thing entirely different to focus on the problem and why it's a problem and what the opportunity to solve it is. Because I think as you start with the problem in mind, you really start to understand that there's usually multiple avenues, multiple personas to solve the problem and to solve the problem for. And each one of those is its own opportunity. And if you start there about what the problem is, you end up coming back to maybe a cheaper solution that solves a bigger pie, or a more targeted solution that, fundamentally solves the problem in a better way than a generalized solution might.
Are you thinking about constraints at this point, like what your company constraints might be, development teams or budget or anything like that? Or are you just thinking about the problem?
Just thinking about the problem, right? The constraints matter, but only in so much that you understand that you might only be able to solve part of it. I think the best way to do it is to explore the problem space completely understand the problem, and then move into the solution space when you've understood the problem. And then start thinking about, okay, so, there's 1,000 features I potentially need in the solution space to completely solve the problem. I have money or talent or resources or whatever for 100 of those, right? And then you can pare back from there. But at least you understand the problem space enough to know exactly what you're solving, how you're going to solve it, and who you're going to solve it for.
Do you know if this changes if you're, let's say, a technical executive, such as a CIO or CTO? I'm sure they're thinking of things differently, but breaking down, these ideas into, the problem and solution space, would you think of it differently when you were CTO?
No, I would always, CTO is a bit younger and I just solve things because that's what engineers do. I think a lot of tech executives are trained to solve problems, and they're really good problem solvers. And so I think they always start in the solution space because that's how you get promoted up that high. You're good at identifying problems and quickly solving them and removing blockers for people. So it's natural for someone to start there. But I think no matter who you are, you have to understand the problem completely before you start solving it. Or you end up with misses here or there on feature set. You overinvest in one area, you underinvest in another one, you miss parts of the problem that you didn't even understand. I think it's really smart to start in the problem space. Either way, even if your instinct is to start in the solution space.
Yeah, it's interesting because like technology leaders, you this as CEO that you're often kind of by yourself, and you're by yourself with your thoughts, and you're trying to understand and solve problems. And product managers often go out and interview and understand the problem and look at the market. Do you do the same thing as a technology leader and trying to understand the problem, or are you just trying to get your thoughts out?
I think that in the problem space, you do need to talk to people and do interviews, but I'm more of a quick moving kind of guy. So I want to understand something. I want to move quickly to the solution space. So I think it depends on your schedule. If it's not an immediate pressing issue, take your time and really understand it. Talk to more people, do that. But, very rarely, let's say if you're a startup or there's this crushing issue that's burning millions of dollars at your enterprise that you need to solve. Oftentimes, there's enough of the thing that's known about the problem that you could safely move into the solution space and solve the top 5 most burning issues, right? And then enter back into the problem space to understand the rest of it. I think it's iterations, though. And it's important to note that it's an iterative process. If you think about product versus project mindset means I get it done and it's done. Product mindset means continual investment. And so I believe that a good product lifecycle is constantly moving between problem space and solution space. And so my advice to tech executives is look where you're at. If some of the issues are so obvious that you know what's causing it, it's fine to solve those first, knowing that you're going to have to revisit to find the rest of the issues. But don't index on things. Don't make assumptions. Solve for what you know are the issues, and then go back and try to discover the other issues as well. And then in that process, understand the value that those fixes will do, because there's always diminishing returns, right? Solving the hot button number one issue is usually almost always worth it. Solving issue 100 could be a $3,000 investment and a $2,000 ROI, in which case, why are you doing that? It's like buying a $100 safe to protect a $50 bill. Like, it's a complete waste of money.
How do you bring in like innovation at that point? You're just thinking about the problem space. Maybe I guess that's more of a solution. Like, how would you actually solve it? Are you thinking about anything innovative at that point, or just trying to still understand the problem the best you can and, like just write it down?
When you're in the problem space, you should not be thinking about innovation. Innovation is a byproduct of solving a problem, right? If you're coming in there and saying, we need to use blockchain somewhere, that's our problem, is we don't have blockchain. I just look at you like, okay, and that could legitimately be a problem. If you're like a startup who's fundraising that knows that they can get an extra 10 million on their valuation because they use blockchain. Well, in the problem space, I guess innovation or seeming innovative matters. But in general, in the problem space, you shouldn't be thinking about solutions or technology, because that's usually means you're living in some like no man's land between problem and solution space. And it's what I call pigeonholing technology. You're just trying to get your favorite technology, your favorite buzzword into the problem space, and you shouldn't be doing it. You should be looking at the problem for what it is, and then finding the right solution to solve the problem in the most effective and efficient way.
Yeah, I like that thought too. I think because a lot of companies do get into the buzzwords and hype, machine learning, AI, and end up spending money that they don't need to. One interesting thing, though, let's actually go to a real example, maybe, or more of a practical example. Let's say you're a technology executive and you find that there's a startup that's building something that is very related to your company. And if you added this product, it would actually be very beneficial. It'd be a new line of business. How do you approach something like that? You don't want to straight copy them, but you do want to innovate, and you understand there's maybe a particular problem that you need to solve. Like, how do you approach something like that?
When you see people solving a problem in a space, I think you have to know what they're really going after. The famous thing about Wayne Gretzky, he used to say you skate to where the puck's going to be. And I think a lot of people don't do that because they copy. They look at the other people. You have to understand where that startup thinks the puck's going to be. And then you need to figure out if your org agrees with that or not. Like, for example, if you're a bank right now and you see all these fintech companies like SoFi and all that other stuff, do you say, well, I'm going to become SoFi? Or do you look where SoFi is going and become that instead? And I believe if you can do that, that's how you win. It's what Apple did. Apple wasn't the first smartphone provider, but they skated to where the puck was going to be. App stores and good user experience and ecosystem integration, right? And they were the first ones there, right? Their first mover advantage was because they got to where the puck was first before everyone else. And I think that's true of all the innovation. Elon Musk and Tesla aren't sitting there trying to figure out what Ford's doing. No, they know that self-driving cars are the future. They know electric's the future. So they skated to where the puck was, and they have such a huge advantage in their technology compared to the other people. And they're now everyone else is going to where Elon is. And if Elon's smart, he's looking where the puck's going to be in 10 years, and he's skating there. And if he's doing that right, he still has his 10-year advantage. So my advice to the innovators is don't copy them, figure out where they're going, decide if you want to be there, or if they're missing the mark, skate to where you think they should be going. And you're going to be much more innovative, and you have a chance to be market defining because you're going to be the first one there.
Okay, that's interesting. So Facebook has a different strategy right now. They're just copying every single idea out there. And I think they're just trying to annihilate everyone and get rid of all these little startups that are popping up. And that's not innovation. They may have recognized a problem, but they're definitely not innovating.
Well, and they're fine with just getting 10% of their user base more engaged. They have a different problem. They're at scale. They probably have as many users as they're ever going to have in the billions. And they might onboard more people, but they're trying to just keep their people in their ecosystem. Right. And they buy competitors and they do that. But that to me shows someone that has a losing lead and a fear of competition. Like Twitter did the same thing. They copied Clubhouse, which is cool, I guess, if you think Clubhouse is innovation. And the people are going to keep doing that because social media's mode isn't innovation. It's the people. And so your best bet isn't to build new innovative features. It's to get people inside your walled garden and keep them there. And so if it means copying features so they don't go to the TikToks or they don't go to the Clubhouses, then it's almost worth it for them to build those kind of features to keep them inside there. But they're playing a different game completely. They're playing a numbers game, right? If I keep 20% of people away from TikTok, well, that's 200 million people or whatever. And they know that they do have a advantage in the fact that the people already come to them first because they're the market leader in that area. But I'd argue that at one point Facebook was innovative, and they beat MySpace and they beat Friendster, which was, I guess, still around. And they beat all those companies because they innovated and they made a more scalable product. But now how do you innovate in the social space? Right? They're actually backwards innovating now. They're preventing people from reposting articles without rereading them. They're doing a bunch of other stuff because of the damage that their move fast, break things has caused. And I think this slows them down. And I think they have a bit of a toxic culture as well that prevents them from acquiring the best talent like they used to. So it's a difficult thing to say, but yeah, it's not innovation what they're doing. They're playing a numbers game, and their stock says that they're doing a good job at it.
So I'm hearing a couple of different things. First, you mentioned, kind of start in the problem space before you get into the solution space. And, innovation is something down the road. The second thing is understand context, right? What market are you in? Are you in a leader position and you're trying to hold on to users? So it could be a particular initiative or product that you're working on. What is the actual goal? Where are you in the market? So I think that's probably extremely important.
Quantity too is important.
Yes. Yeah. The other thing is where do you want to go? Yeah.
Correct. Yep.
And I'm thinking, since you're a developer and you've been technical for a long time, Agile has a nice breakdown of breaking down requirements. I like the way they break things up into stories, epics, initiatives, and themes. And let me just take a minute to define that. So stories are also called user stories. They're like short requirements or requests written from the perspective of an end user. Epics are a large body of work that can be broken down into a number of smaller tasks, which are stories. Initiatives are a collection of epics that drive toward a common goal. And then themes are a large focus areas that span across the organization. If you're a technology leader, does that framework help you in breaking down your ideas and trying to communicate what you're trying to achieve and thinking about Agile?
I've seen plenty of Agile projects build the wrong thing. Do I think helping people understand those terms helps? It can't hurt. Knowing more things can't hurt, but I don't in my mind, the reason people fail to break down their work is they jump to the solution space again. Step one, going to the problem space and really understanding it. They jump to the solution space and then they build features that they're not sure that people even need to solve the problem. And then they build poorly defined cards that don't really have real requirements in them. And they build epics and all this other stuff, but it's all meaningless. The value is not being measured. And because it's not being measured, there's a lot of activity, but not a lot of value being created. And so when we think about the framework of Agile, I think the beauty of it is a couple things. First is that they're mixed mode teams, meaning that there's different perspectives added to the team. There's oftentimes customer support on teams, and these multidisciplinary teams help bring different perspectives to the work, which makes the requirements better. As you're working down and you're making sure that you're building the right feature to solve a problem, again, even at the epic level, I think it's really important to know, like, who are we solving this for? Why are we solving for them? How are they going to use it? And then driving it from that perspective rather than the perspective of, I know we need this, so just build it. You do have to talk to users at the epic level. And then that'll help you drive the stories of what you need to do. And then product people can put acceptance criteria on those cards and on the epic level so that you're talking the same language, right? One of the biggest issues is at most organizations is the business says one thing, and they use an overloaded term, or they use words that make sense to them, but the engineers hear something completely different. The designers hear something very different, and then the wrong thing gets built. That's why it's important to design up front. So, in my mind, design is a bridge function between the business and the engineers. And it's a critical function, I believe, was underrepresented for a long time in engineering. And now it's finally getting the respect it deserves because it level sets. It's very hard to look at an image and say, that's not going to solve the problem, or that will solve. But it is very easy to look at it and say, it will solve the problem. Here's how it solves. I don't like the way it looks. It creates a common language such that everyone understands what's being done. And then, you can derive acceptance criteria and things like that from it. And so I really believe that for Agile to work, you need these multidisciplinary teams, you need designers, you need product, you need people to help translate this language and bring different perspectives to make sure you're defining work really well. And it's worth taking the time up front. Like, many people, when I just get down to work, they think movement is important, but movement isn't the most important thing. The most important thing is building the right thing. And if it takes an extra week, I like to talk to people like this when I'm talking about process. If it takes an extra week while you're doing development, that's better than burning 2 weeks and developing the wrong thing. Take the extra week, measure twice, cut once, be purposeful, right? It might seem like it's slower, but you wasted the capacity either way. You either wasted on building the wrong thing, and maybe you sharpen the skills of your developers, so when they do leave your company, they get paid more. Congratulations. But you wasted their time, right? It's much better to be deliberate than it is to be moving. And the second thing is, if you do it in a continuous cycle, like 2 week sprints, things like that, you can have offsets so that the developers are constantly doing work, but they're doing the right work. And it's worth, if you're not feel like you're doing this now, pausing work, slamming the brakes, and then starting with that purpose again, even if it means being idle for 2 weeks, because it's better that they stop building the wrong thing than it is that they just keep building things.
Well, wouldn't it be beneficial for like technology leaders to, if they're starting a project that eventually there's going to be some software component, or it's going to be, this code written, to learn about, like you're saying, what engineers are going through, what designers and products are going through? Because we've been a part of a lot of projects where a CFO or a CIO or CTO had a vision, and what they had in mind was not communicated properly to the people that are actually executing the project. And then at the end, we just didn't deliver, or it just wasn't delivered on mark on what the executive had in mind. And if maybe they would have wrote it down in, this like initiative, and here's how I'm thinking about it, that way downstream, it kind of translates and it's a little bit more of a common language, as you said.
Well, and that's 100%. And that's why I think discovery is so important. So that by the end of a discovery on any given piece of work, and discovery could be a day, it could be 3 weeks, it could be 3 months, right? But getting together and understanding exactly what's going to be built, how it's going to be built, what purpose each one of these things is being built is going to solve, creates that common language. And getting to the highest level of fidelity that you can, even if it's user stories and the way you present them to the executive or the project sponsor, I think it's critical to your success, because that's how you avoid these loosey high-end conversations. I think you have to go incredibly concrete on these. If you don't, you run the risk of, again, like you said, building the wrong thing because the wrong thing was communicated. And no one wants to look dumb in the sense that I have to ask a bunch of questions. I don't think it makes you look dumb. I think it makes you look professional. And like, you really understand that, words are a lossy form of communication, right? Words mean multiple things. They have context in people's heads. You have to get to concrete. That's why design, again, is so powerful, and why prototypes are so powerful, because they are quick and dirty ways of showing somebody, this is what I interpreted you saying. And they can say by pictures or actual functioning software that, no, that's not what I meant. And now you can truly have the conversation around what they meant. No one can tell you what they meant until they know that you don't understand what they meant. It's a weird thing. I mean, no one's that good of a communicator that until people have to understand why you don't understand what they're saying to understand you don't understand it, as weird and complicated as that sounded.
No, I think that's another thing to add to our list of things to consider is I think technology leaders, they're reading tons of books, they're continuously learning. So understand what Agile is, understand how development teams are actually building software, and think about the downstream impact of what you're trying to communicate. What's maybe like a tactical, practical thing? What's like a good way to communicate ideas? Have you seen that just a PowerPoint, getting even sketching it on a piece of paper? You mentioned that, or InVision, Figma, like how detailed should you be as you're trying to capture your ideas?
I think the higher level you are, the less fidelity you need to communicate your ideas. And what I mean by that is, if you are a CIO, drawing it on a piece of paper is very good, because then questions can be asked. What did you mean by this box? What did you mean over here? Questions can start to formulate. Again, words aren't good mediums to communicate things, so drawings. And then as you move down the stack, because a Figma is a very a semi-heavy investment. Is it expensive as entering a development cycle? No. Figma is meant to be very quick and easy to build visual prototypes in. And so, but, like I said, if you're just talking about an idea, draw it out, show people what you mean, and use wireframing to do that. And I think as you know more and more, as people understand more and more, then it's okay to invest a little bit more each time. And by the time you're all the way down the cone of uncertainty before you begin development, you're able to say with good assurance you're going to build the right thing. And and how do you remove certainty from the process? Because uncertainty is risk, right? And I'm not saying you should have zero risk. You have zero risk, you have zero reward, and that's just how the world works. But you should de-risk as much as possible that is reasonable to do. Taking 8 weeks to define 2 weeks worth of work, unless that 2 weeks is very valuable, probably too mitigative of risks, right? But taking a day to define 2 days of work, there's no way you have the fidelity you need to make sure everything's going to be done right. And so there's a certain amount of thought that goes into this and a certain amount of fidelity depending on what you're working on. If you're going to invest $5 million into building something, a good rule of thumb is you should probably have invested 10%, $500K in discovery, right? And that, to me, no one does. They hear $500K to not even have working software, and I say, yeah, but it's better than spending $5 million and not having working software. Or even worse, working software that doesn't do what you need it to do. That is the worst thing, because you just stare at it. it's a nightmare. So it's, you have to go.
Well, I'm saying there's probably a point even before that, right? I think there's a lot of confusion between prototypes and MVPs. Like you could get a pretty solid MVP for that amount, but you could be even before that prototype, like you mentioned, just some sketches, maybe some wireframes, have your team wireframe something to just see if they've captured your idea. And you could run a lot of experiments that way. Do you think that's a good way to maybe initially start thinking about whether, your vision is being captured correctly?
100%. I think the way you pursue this is, like I said, I think as you discover, so let's say the hypothetical $5 million project, the $500K that you're investing should be spread across all the areas of uncertainty you have. There's tech uncertainty, for example. Can machine learning solve this problem? Maybe. Go write a prototype. Invest the $100K into that. What would the designs look like? Well, talk to users, build that. Get rid of the uncertainty that you can. You can't get rid of all uncertainty. People get sick. People leave the company. There will always be uncertainty in projects, but the areas where you want to invest in discovery are where you're most uncertain. And at the beginning of any project where you have the most uncertainty is what exactly are we building? Not what the CIO wants to build, not because, oh, look, we think smartphones are cool, so we should build one. What problem do you think you're going to solve that would be compelling for the market to listen to? And markets are different. If you're CIO, your market's internal people, right? It's all the people at the company that need to use your software. But that's a market, and it's a high-paying one too, because you're a cost center. If you're a CTO, the market is usually the market, or it could even be the internal market. And so you just really understand who you're building for as well, and what problem you're solving and how you're going to solve for them. And then you run into the other types of unknowns. Does that feature quite look right in Figma? I don't think that should be a drop-down. That should be a checkbox. Does machine learning even work for this? Things like that. But again, you're moving from the problem space and understanding the problem you're solving, why you're solving it, down into the solution space. And as you get further into the solution space, you're able to better define the work, better communicate what that work is, show people what that work is, and prove that the work can be done. That's when you end up with a beautiful backlog that can be executed with certainty over the span of, however long it takes. And on top of that, I think a lot of people thought when they went agile, it meant no more of these big requirements gathering sessions, none of this, none of that. And what they've created is a failure machine because they don't think about what they're doing. Because they think agile gets rid of thinking because we'll fail 2 weeks at a time. And that's absolutely true. You will. But if you fail 2 weeks at a time, you don't fail upward in agile or in software for that matter. You fail downward. Yeah. Right. You fail faster because you're not failing all at once at 9 months. You at least know you're trending towards the ditches, but you are rolling into the ditch. And so in my mind, you have to think about things before you do them. Measure once, cut twice, or measure twice, cut once is something a great paradigm for software. Yeah, something. And people should really think about it. Agility is not an excuse for sloppiness. Agility is about helping teams execute better by improving their process week in and week out, making the team morale higher and the output better and hopefully quicker. And it prevents waste if you're testing with customers every 2 weeks, because ultimately, even if you show them a design, until they click that checkbox or use the dropdown, they can't tell you how it feels to use. But they will after you use it. So there's a lot of good things, and it does allow you to pivot, but it doesn't prevent the forethought needed to make software successful.
Yeah, I think we're compiling a pretty good list here. A couple of things I heard from the conversation is adding to the list is write it down. I think a lot of executives explain too much. And so write your ideas down. It helps think about the idea. Can you explain it to a non-technical person? Move into discovery. Really, that's important. I think, Andrew, as much as I'd love to take your $5 million or $10 million, I think it's best to start with the discovery, get into a prototype, and kind of keep moving forward as you think about the process. So one question actually I had around prototyping, and I think you mentioned this before in some of our conversations. If you work down a prototype and you're kind of working through an idea, there is this danger that you could actually talk yourself out of the idea. Where's that balance where, sometimes it's great to just build it because you're going to learn so much, right? And just keep moving forward, and you're going to keep, and eventually you will get a good idea if you're on the right track. Well, how do you reconcile that?
I think that whether you prototyped it and talked yourself out of it, or you kept doing it until you figured it out, I think there is the same amount of waste in that process. You're just doing a lot of different prototypes until you figured out in the second case where you just kept going. You're just rapidly prototyping the wrong thing over and over again until you found the magic. I think people talk themselves out of projects all the time because of the uncertainty. There are only, it's easy to look at a problem and say, well, geez, I need 10% of the market. That's going to be hard. But how do you confirm that you can get 10%? Well, I think there are ways to talk yourself into a project. There's many ways there are ways to talk things out of projects. And I think you just have to do it. I mean, I think people have different risk tolerances. And software, I believe, is inherently risky. Just for all the reasons we talked about. People don't know how to communicate. It's a team project. It's a team of highly talented professionals that are very expensive. The endeavor of software is by itself risky, and it's a pretty significant risk. And when you think about it that way, the reward's extremely high too. I mean, there's no other industry that can save a company $10 billion, but software can. And that's why people are investing billions of dollars into digital transformation for that exact reason. I think JP Morgan puts $11 billion every year into their software fund. The reason they do that is they realize that they can have a significant return on investment on that 11 billion, and it's well worth doing. And so, I think you just have to figure out where your risk tolerance is again, and then do activities to find out whether you're certain that this can have a good outcome or it's not, and that it meets your level of uncertainty and risk tolerance that you might have for it.
Yeah, I think it's very similar to how investors think about risk. It's a numbers game. Salespeople think the same way. Even marketing, we don't know what's going to work. Let's try 9 or 10 different things. Start moving forward. I've seen a lot of enterprises have innovation teams that their job is to try, 50 different initiatives or projects through the year, and that gets broken down. 5 may seem some successful, some promise, and then 1 or 2 actually become real products. So I think it's just get into the habit of, if you want to move forward and try to start capturing, I just have a lot of ideas. I've read some authors say, come up with 10 ideas a day, because over the course of a month, you'll have 300 ideas or so, something. And out of those, I'm sure you'll have a few good ones. So just, I think, getting in the habit of continuing to push forward.
Yep. And that's, again, they always say, you brought up investors, that the best investors are contrarians. And I think the reason why that's probably true is that the contrarians are willing to look at, the opposite case. And in the case of software, where it's incredibly risky, they're willing to say is like, okay, yeah, but what if it succeeds, right? Like when you look at something like Airbnb, it's a completely absurd idea. So people are going to pay me to sleep in my spare bedroom. Okay, cool. Yeah. Maybe. And then what? They're a $7 billion marketplace now for people staying in other people's bedrooms, which is an absurd idea. I'm going to get in some random dude's car at the airport and he's going to drive me to my hotel. Yep. Sounds crazy, but Uber's like a $12 billion company. Like these companies seem odd. They're incredibly risky. They seem like terrible ideas, but on the surface, but the people that invested in them got rid of their uncertainty for multiple reasons. How is Uber different than a taxi? I didn't know the taxi driver before. Yeah, he spent $10K on a token or whatever, a medallion, but does that make him trustworthy? No, God, no. There's no background checks on medallions. And so end thesis was they knew something other people didn't. And I think if you trust your gut instinct and you do these activities to break down the work the right way, you end up with a sense of certainty, and you end up learning something that maybe no one else knows, which is a huge competitive advantage and will keep you going and make you successful.
Thanks for listening. You can always connect with us at skiplist.com.